Federal prosecutors have granted immunity to the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization in exchange for his testimony in Michael Cohen's case. Prosecutors subpoenaed Alan Weisselberg earlier this year, and he reportedly gave them information about hush money payments made to two women during the 2016 presidential campaign. The president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, testified that those payments were directed by then-candidate Trump. Weisselberg's immunity comes as another Trump ally. There he is. David Pecker was also granted immunity by prosecutors. Pecker is the publisher of the National Enquirer, which bought and killed the stories of those two women claiming to have affairs with Mr. Trump. Now, all this news comes as the president and first lady arrived in Ohio on Friday. Mr. Trump was the keynote speaker at the Ohio Republican Party dinner. Joining me now from Washington is Daniel Lippman, reporter for Politico and co-author of the Politico Playbook. Good to see you, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
So we learn that former Trump Organization CFO Weisselberg granted immunity in exchange for talking to prosecutors about this Michael Cohen case. Then David Pecker also reportedly granted immunity as well. And there's some, I guess, debate over how significant this is for the president. What's your read on that?
I think it's very significant because Weisselberg knows every single dime that left the company and that came in as well. And so he was very detail-oriented, and Trump in some of his books has praised Weisselberg as a loyal employee. So it's kind of ironic that now he's flipping, and Trump hates those flippers a lot, as he said this week.
But I suppose the question is how clearly this is a flip. Or is it possible, if you're hoping for the best for the president or his legal fortunes, that perhaps this is just a narrow flip on the question of the Cohen payments and that he's not going to unlock the safe and show all his cards? Can you hope for that if you're supporting the president?
I think you can a little bit, but as we know, Robert Mueller finds out everything. And so you really can't stop him if there's wrongdoing in that general orbit. And so they will ask Weisselberg lots of other questions that they have about any Russian loans, all the Russians who are buying up Trump properties. And Weisselberg is a guy who does not want to go to jail, especially for Donald Trump. And I think he views this as a strategic play for himself. And they probably don't talk much anymore. And if Trump goes back to his company after, I don't think he's going to keep Weisselberg in there.
It seems doubtful at this juncture. And with all this, the specter of the midterms looms. In Friday's Playbook, you wrote about Vice President Pence's trip to New Orleans, fundraising with Congressman Steve Scalise down there. What was their message, and how are Republicans navigating the president's legal troubles as the midterms approach?
As you can imagine, they're not going to brag about what a great week this was, because this was probably the president's worst week in office in terms of the negative news, and things were just going off the rails. Even today, they, as we might talk about later, Trump is saying that denuclearization of North Korea is not going as well as he had hoped for. And so the message that they drove to donors really is kind of a looking at the economy and how they have delivered on tax cuts and on judicial nominations, but trying to avoid a bloodbath in November, since of the 47 top Republican contenders in competitive districts, Democrats have outraised them in 20 of them. And that's significant because most of those Republicans are incumbents, and they usually get much more money. And so one example is Dana Rohrabacher's district in California. Dana's, pretty pro-Putin. His Democratic challenger has raised more than $1.4 million more than Dana.
The president, in his remarks in Ohio, lingered on the economy. That was kind of his main talking point there. But in the crowd in Ohio, the governor, John Kasich, not in attendance. And you can say, oh, Kasich is never liked Trump. He's been one of the most vocal anti-Trump Republicans. But still, the governor of your party doesn't even show up to an event that you hold in that state. To what extent is the Republican Party hanging in there for Trump, and to what extent should he be worried?
I think Kasich's explanation was he was bringing his daughter to college or something, and so, but, you know, he's the governor, and what I think is funny is when Barack Obama would travel to red states, he would get sometimes greeted on the airport tarmac by the Republican governor. And so that does not happen in the Trump presidency very much, although there are some Democrats who want to stay in his good graces or at least avoid being seen as too anti-Trump. But the Republican Party has become the Trump party in many facets, at least for the next couple of years. He is really molded in his image. And so you have these Trumpy candidates, Trump wannabes, running all across the country. And there aren't that many moderate Republicans left in significant numbers in leadership roles in the party. And so that country club Republicans, you don't really hear about that phrase anymore.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see to what extent that shifts if things get worse for the president in this investigation. Turning to overseas, the president canceled Mike Pompeo's planned visit to North Korea. Explain why. What's happening there?
I think it's just a recognition that, as I said before, denuclearization has not gone up to snuff as Trump had wanted. And it's not good to reward a dictatorship like North Korea with a visit from the Secretary of State of the United States of America. And so they're still trying to persuade the North Koreans to not abandon their denuclearization push. And they haven't, done many or any ballistic missile tests. They've destroyed some sites. But you don't see this comprehensive denuclearization that Trump had said. And what's I found interesting about that tweet is he still says, I just want to wish Chairman Kim great respect. And
warmest
can't wait to
regards
see
and
him.
respect.
And so he was kind of softening the blow of, you're not going to get Pompeo to Pyongyang, but I'm going to flatter you in my most public way, which is a tweet.
But this is a stick Trump has used before. Remember, he initially canceled his visit or his summit with Kim before then rescheduling it. And he also, in the tweets you mentioned, blamed China and linked this to the trade negotiations with China. What's that piece?
Yeah, so China, as North Korea's main outside ally, they are really critical to making sure those UN and U.S. sanctions are enforced. And you already see some breakages in terms of easier for the North to export some goods like coal, and that it gives them some hard foreign currency. And so the U.S.-China trade war is not helping matters. And it seems like if we can resolve that, and that's a big if, then maybe we can get China back on our side on North Korea. But they've always been wobbly because they feel that if you pressure North Korea too much, then you could squeeze them too far, and then their regime could collapse, and then you get millions of refugees. And so they want to ensure that the Kim dynasty stays in place at least until they can figure out what to do with this hellish existence that millions of human beings are facing every day in North Korea.
One more topic, and I sometimes wonder if a year from now, like the fifth question will be clearly the most important topic, but in the five-hole this evening, the fight with the president and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the president going hard after his own Attorney General again, Sessions responding back. There's been this back and forth. Are Republicans in Washington, in Congress, rallying around Sessions or backing away from him?
They've kind of gotten weak need regarding defending their former colleague, longtime colleague in the Senate, who a lot of them respected. And if you talk to people in the Trump White House, even people who used to like Sessions, they don't like the fact that he didn't recuse him, or he did recuse himself. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are a lot of Senate Republicans who they're throwing up their hands up in the air and saying, well, Trump is going to fire him after the midterms. And I think it's going to be a race against time. for Robert Mueller to issue his report or wrap up his investigation. He's moving quickly. I'm sure he's at his desk from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at least, trying to, and his 15 angry Democrats as well, trying to wrap this up before Sessions gets the boot. The problem is how to replace him. Who's going to take that job? What Republican in their right mind would want to face the wrath of President Trump on a weekly basis?
Drama ahead. Politico's Daniel Lippman. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.